Please welcome to the stage your moderator, Soraya Sarhaddi Nelson.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to this important fireside chat where we're going to be talking about security and how it impacts global cooperation, democratic resilience, and sustainable development. I'd like to introduce our featured speaker today, Valbona Zeneli. As she comes up here, I'll tell you a little bit about her. She's a senior fellow for peace, security, and defense at Friends of Europe, and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council of the United States. From 2011 until 2023, she chaired strategic initiatives at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies. And Val is also a professor of national security and geoeconomics at the NATO School and European University Institute, among others. Welcome, Val.
Well, thank you very much, Soraya, for this invitation.
Great. So to start us off, what are the global security issues that are having the most impact on democratic resilience and sustainable development at the moment?
Well, thank you for that question. It's so important. I think we stand today at an inflection point between a fading area of stability that we have seen for decades and a dangerous age of disruption, I'll call it, which is broad in scope and nature too. I think, as we have seen, and the conversations here today have focused on those arguments, that Europe's periphery has turned from a ring of friends into a ring of fire. We face strategic competition with a revisionist Russia. We have a military, economically, and technologically advanced China, which is both are wanting to reshape or disrupt, as in the case of Russia, the international order. Terrorism continues to threaten our people. I think disruptive challenges are changing, actually, through the emerging technologies, are changing the nature of competition and also confrontation and conflict. So all those digital transformations are changing the way that we view security. Trade wars are challenging, I would say, future growth, economic growth and prosperity and development. So climate change was mentioned more times, energy transitions. There's a long list, I would say, of challenges that we're seeing nowadays. And I believe, as you pointed out in your question, I think it's only through resilience, which has to be comprehensive and forward-looking resilience, then we can keep going and enjoy the freedoms, human rights, and prosperity that we have seen over the last few decades.
Well, there are certainly some countries that have a different view of freedom at the moment. So, and I'm referring to my country of the United States. Do tariffs and other elements of Donald Trump's America First approach provide a new economic rationale for decoupling European security dependencies from Washington? And if so, is that decoupling even achievable?
Well, this is a great question, especially in the context of today's, geopolitical chaos, I will call it. Well, first, let's put that into perspective. I believe that the United States and European Union, Europe more in generally, have maintained long, prosperous, a very strong relationship. And we should not forget that this is, in terms of business, it's worth $9.5 trillion annually. So that is very important. More importantly, that was based on values, human rights, and standards. And I think that's where the challenge stands for the future. Just to put that in the context, only trade, it's around $1.6 trillion a year between the United States and Europe, which means it's 4.4 billion daily. So that shows the extent and the importance of our transatlantic relationship. But most importantly are the investments, because when it comes to exports, investments, and sales of US foreign affiliates in Europe are 4 times the US exports in Europe. And when it comes to European exports to the United States, that's much lower than the sales from the foreign affiliates there. So let's put in the context of the importance of the economic relationship. You mentioned and you asked about President Trump's tariffs. I think tariffs are being viewed as a tool for 3 purposes. First, for negotiation, Second, could be used as a punitive tool towards countries. And third, as a macroeconomic tool. And, it have to do, the objectives are leveling the playing field in trade. There was a lot of conversation even today during the summit about that. Limit the flow of migration and fentanyl, but also increase government revenues and also stimulate domestic production in the United States. And I think that's an issue not only for the United States, but that's an issue also for Europe. And only, in terms of numbers in the United States, only, 10% of the manufacturing happens actually in the country of the needs. So putting that into the perspective. So you asked the question if the Europeans should think about decoupling economically and from the security perspective. Absolutely. And I think, we should the Europeans should consider and plan through and be game on what could be the future. And I think just walking this idea, even if it's just a tabletop exercise, I think it will be very important to have strategic thinking for the future and see, how we can increase not only strategic autonomy, but also sovereignty of the European Union. But also, on the second part is that I think this exercise will be important also to understand what's at stake. So, my response then will be that decoupling will not be possible. We should think about decoupling, be ready, have a strategic perspective on that. But that's why I mentioned that, that the economic relations between the US and Europe, and it shows the importance. So I think it will be a bad idea, even if it's in short term, but we need to be prepared on that, and Europe needs to learn to play the long game and think throughout that long game. In the meantime, I think we should take some strategic pause and see, what can we do in the future in order to strengthen those economic relations, because at the end of the day, that's what's important for people on both sides of the Atlantic.
So let's just pivot a moment, like America always likes to do, and talk about China. What role should or could China play in realigning those transatlantic dependencies? I mean, are there other G20 members or non-G20 members for that matter, who could step in for the US?
So if you're asking about China, I think quite simple. I think China should not be allowed to have any special consideration when it comes to transatlantic relations. That does not mean that we should not continue and have negotiations with China. But if you consider the turbulence in transatlantic relations, I don't think China should be allowed a role on that, or like Russia, that they're standing and watching what's happening in the turmoil in the transatlantic relationship. Because I think we have to accept that we know the predatory trade, practices that we have seen over the last 3-4 decades, but also, in terms of diplomacy. So that's well known. I think, the Americans, more than the Europeans at the very beginning, were very naive about globalization and who will be the winners and losers of globalization. And so I think that it's important to continue the conversation with China. It's a very important trade partner. It's the biggest import partner for the European Union. It's about around 21% of imports that come to Europe. However, when we negotiate, I believe, with China, we should keep in mind and focus on things that are on our favor as Europeans, or as in the transatlantic community, and actually go with our eyes wide open on what we want to achieve, have clear objectives, and how they will be achieved and how much they will be implemented.
So are there other non-G20 members or other G20 members that Europe should be pivoting?
I think, that's why how Europe can increase its own bargaining power by collaborating with other members, that are very important in the global economy, India and other G20 members. I will say that actually, one of the reasons why, tariffs, there was a U-turn, or a moratorium on the tariffs recently, because most of the countries in the world, they want to continue to have free trade. So actually, collaborating with more countries will increase the bargaining power of Europe. When it comes specifically on China, I will say that The policies of Europe towards China will depend on four main geopolitical trends that we're seeing. The first one will be the U.S.-China trade war and how that oil rivalry, how that will play out. I think the second, it was mentioned today during the conversations, it's also Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine and, the Chinese support on that war. And that was an eye-opener, I think, for a lot of Europeans. The third one will be the Chinese economic competitiveness and how that plays in the overall EU competitiveness. And then the last one will really be US engagement globally, but most importantly for the Europeans, what will be the role of the US also as a from the security perspective as a guarantor in Europe.
Well, one of the interesting things that's come out of Ukraine recently, or I should say the US-Ukraine relationship, is this new US-Ukraine mineral deal, which establishes a joint investment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. While it doesn't include this demand that Ukraine pay back $500 billion in aid that have been provided so far, it does, and that's something that President Trump had called for, it does give the United States access to future mineral resources on competitive terms. So does this quid pro quo approach to helping out our partners security-wise, is that going to define how global security cooperation looks in the future?
Well, talking about global security cooperation, well, let me start with this, that I think on Ukraine and what we have seen, the second invasion of Ukraine more than 2 years ago now from Russia, I think we all have some responsibility and we should be ashamed, I believe, of not being better prepared to anticipate Russia's move on Ukraine. And I think this is, again, it's blissful ignorance, I think, on the Western side, and it's wishful thinking on our side that we don't behave like aggressors. That means that we do not do the scenarios and the planning, what happens if authoritarian regimes such as the Russian one will act like they did. So I think, I could go on and mention the Budapest Memorandum and what are the responsibilities of countries out of that. But going back to the mineral agreement that was signed between the US and Ukraine, I think that after few months of uncertainties, also what was going to happen with the new administration when it came to Ukraine, I view it as a positive step, as a baby step, as a positive, first step towards, I would say, a normalization of relations also between the United States and Ukraine after some turmoil that we had seen over the last few weeks. I think that deal will bring the United States and Ukraine into better alignment, because the deal also emphasizes the shared goals of resource development, the establishment of this joint fund, but also it's a very important point there in that deal which has to do with Ukraine's future reconstruction. So I see that deal more as as U.S. starting, or the new administration starting to support more Ukraine. And also the new information that we have seen over the last few days, that there might be more sanctions on Russia. It looks like this idea of Kissinger in reverse into having better, cooperation or better relations with Russia in order to, divide Russia and China is not working out. So, in my opinion, it still remains to be seen, but I think it was a first good positive step in the right direction.
Well, it sort of has the Trump administration invested in Ukraine doing well, because if they want to have these resources, there has to be Ukraine.
I believe so. I think it's more of a commitment part, because for the resources to really be used, it will take years. And I think it's a security guarantee in order, if the U.S. is really, responsible, will be there having, 50% of the shares of those resources. I see that more as a security guarantee towards Ukraine.
Great. So how are G20 goals like sustainable multilateralism, climate justice, and elimination of hunger achievable, especially with the United States poised to take over a G20 presidency?
We had a lot of conversations today, so I don't want to repeat, what other
No,
speakers
but if we look at it
really,
from a security lens.
from a security perspective, I think if we don't have the right leadership, they're not achievable. And I think that, as we discussed today, we all knew that multinational institutions, there had to be reforms on those institutions, be that on WTO, be that, IMF, or I think their things are going much better. And the support that the US gave to the IMF, I think it's positive and in the right direction also for other multinational, multilateral institutions. But I think it all goes back to the issue of leadership. And then I've been amazed in these last 2 days that a lot of young leaders are coming actually from G20 countries. A lot of young leaders from Africa, from Asia, fewer from Europe. So I think that in Europe we have taken for a long time too many things for granted. And I see more leadership coming with new ideas. We need new ideas. I mean, the things that those institutions that were built more than decades ago are not working in the current situation. So I believe that there might be some more impetus for some big changes that could bring to resolve our problems. But it's a different, I think we need to see those things differently. I think the narrative has to be different. It has to be seen as win-win solutions and not like it has been seen in the past. But I think it belongs to the young leaders, and civil society institutions, organizations will have a much bigger role than in the past in order to drive reform and push through reforms of those institutions.
Any closing thoughts on global security impacts on multilateralism and how we best address it?
Well, I think we should not forget what people are caring about, and people are caring about their well-being, their prosperity, and we need to find the ways to to look at those questions and issues. We're discussing a lot about the United States, and one point that I did not mention when it comes to all this new America First trade policy has to do with the fact that is visible in the United States, the big inequalities. And those inequalities are not seen only in the US, they are seen inside countries' inequalities. And those are, I think, are not measured directly by the GDP growth rates. I think we need to find other, indicators to really measure how economic growth is actually going to families, average families, how they are impacted by that. So I think the biggest issue for the future will be the issue of inequality, not only in developing countries, but also in developed ones. And I think that, we must have a much broader, comprehensive view on security, because all the things that you mentioned, from human to climate and everything, they're all connected and they affect our well-being and our prosperity. So I think that's the point of view that we need to look at. And then maybe I have a point regarding, the transatlantic, coordination, which I think it's very important for the future of those multilateral institutions. I think that we should not really, we should make good use of a crisis. And it was mentioned more times today. I believe that even when it comes to a potential agreement on tariffs between the United States and the European Union, maybe we'll not have a zero tariffs agreement. It looks like there's no buy-in on both sides, not only in the United States. But I think that some of the negotiations might go into what we call non-tariff barriers. And of course, that will be especially in the digital sphere, where there's a big appetite also of the American companies to come to the European market. It's a paradox that if those non-tariff barriers will be reduced for US companies, actually it will be positive also for the internal companies in the EU market, because those non-tariff barriers make up a cost that, if we translate it into tariffs, will be around 40%. So this is a tariff that we have put on ourselves, and that's all what also the Draghi report, Mario Draghi's report, talks about competitiveness. I think that Europe has all the tools to use inside our institutions in order to increase the European competitiveness, which I believe will be a question for the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Val. This has been a very informative conversation.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm really delighted. It was an honor for me to be here, and I thank the Global Solutions team.
So we're going to take a break now, and then there will be another panel following on. So thank you very much for being here.